Ayodhya slept under a quiet sky, the Sarayu curling around its walls like a watchful guardian. Lanterns thinned to embers along the palace corridors, and the night guards paced in measured arcs, their spears catching a faint, patient light. Inside, King Dasharatha walked alone, counting the echo of his own steps as if they were the only truth left to measure. He paused at a lattice window where the river showed a thin, moving ribbon of black. The city was secure, the granaries were full, the borders were calm, and yet in the inner rooms, silence had a different weight. It pressed on him in ways no enemy ever had. The line of Raghu was proud and unbroken, but time pressed forward without a promise of an heir. The door opened with a soft sigh. Sage Vasishta stepped in, bringing with him the sense that a wise fire had been lit somewhere nearby, steady, without smoke. His hair fell in pale strands, his eyes alive and unhurried. "You are awake, Majesty," he said. "Sleep has found other houses," Dasharatha replied, trying for a smile that would not come. "I walk these halls and hear a sound I do not know how to answer." "What sound is that?" "The sound of no children." Vasishta crossed the room and stood beside the king at the window. They watched the river together for a moment, letting the old friendship between them speak first. When he finally turned, the sage's voice was calm. "Then we must act, not only wish." "Tell me how," the king said. His hands were clasped behind his back, but the knuckles had gone white. "There is a path the old law preserves," Vasishta said. "The Putrakamshti Yajna. It is not ceremony for display. It is discipline made visible, correct preparation, pure offerings, right minds. Invite the sages who know this work. Feed the city so your vow does not stand alone. When devotion is exact, grace often finds it." Dasharatha exhaled, as if a door he could not see had been unlocked. "If this is the path, I will walk it, but will the gods look this way? I have waited long." "Patience is not the same as passivity," Vasishta said. "Let the city wake to your vow. Let the fires be kindled with a clear heart. And one more thing, we will invite Rishi Ashringa. His presence steadies rites that must not fail." The king nodded once, a decision settling into place. Vasishta bowed and left with the quiet certainty of a man who knows the map and the road. Within the hour, messengers rode out under the paling moon. Courtyards were washed. The stone shone with a clean, dark gloss. Copper vessels were set in lines, and ghee caught the lamp light like sheets of amber. From the kitchens came the measured rhythm of grain being sifted for a vow no one would name too loudly. Before dawn, the palace stirred to a careful music. Women traced rangali at their thresholds. Children leaned, half hidden, to watch. Old men spoke prayers that had the shape of things remembered. When Dasharatha stepped into the main courtyard, he wore white, and something in his posture had changed. The weight of the crown had not left him, it had simply found a companion in hope. Vasishta met him by the unlit fire altar. "The offerings are ready. The seats are arranged by the rule. When Rishi Ashringa arrives, we will begin." "Has word reached him?" the king asked. "A rider left before first light," the sage said. "If the roads are kind, he will be here by noon." The king lifted his gaze to the pale sky that waited for color. He was not a man for omens, yet he felt the day leaning toward him rather than away. Servants moved with a quiet efficiency that belonged to rooms where attention was a form of prayer. Drums hung covered at the far end of the court, as if even sound had agreed to wait its turn. By mid-morning, a small procession appeared at the eastern gate. Rishi Ashringa's walk was unadorned, his face untroubled by the distance he had traveled. He greeted Vasishta with a single nod and the king with a long, steady look that felt like a promise more than a courtesy. "Welcome," Dasharatha said. "We have prepared as the law requires." "Then let us keep the law as it keeps us," Rishi Ashringa replied. The sages took their places by ancient habit, north, south, east, west, each seat chosen for reasons older than the city's stones. The queens watched from a quiet gallery, Kausalya with her still dignity, Kaikeyi with an intent gaze that missed nothing, Sumitra with a gentleness that made the room feel wider. They did not speak, they did not need to. The vow belonged to them, too. At a gesture from Vasishta, the fire was lit. A slender column of smoke rose, straight and unafraid. Mantras began, first like footsteps on new earth, then like the measured beat of a heart that had found its pace. Offerings met flame, ghee that bloomed into light, rice that cracked to fragrance, wood that carried forests into embers. Rishi Ashringa's voice carried without force. Each syllable landed cleanly, as if language itself had been washed and set in place. Dasharatha fixed his thoughts to a single line that would not break. "Let my house be filled with life. Let the kingdom inherit more than memory." Hours moved the way hours do when they belong to something larger than clocks. The sun climbed, shadows turned underfoot. No one coughed, no bird cried, even the wind seemed to wait at the door. And then, as often happens when a long line of exact acts reaches its final bead, the air changed. It was not thunder or spectacle. It was a presence, gentle and near, like the moment a healed wound stops being a memory of pain. From the edge of the flame, a soft glow thickened, resolved, and held. Within that light, a form appeared, bearing a golden bowl whose fragrance reached even the outer steps. The sages bowed without surprise. The king bowed with gratitude that felt new in his bones. Rishi Ashringa spoke first. "Receive what is given, share it with faith." Dasharatha lifted the bowl with both hands. It was warm and sweet, a promise made edible. He gave a portion to Kausalya, a portion to Kaikeyi, a portion to Sumitra, then paused and offered the final share again to Sumitra. No one questioned the act. It felt like a sentence the day had been waiting to complete. The mantras closed like a well-made door. Smoke thinned, light settled, the courtyards exhaled. Rishi Ashringa turned to the king and spoke softly, as one speaks near a sleeping child. "The path has been set. Walk it with patience." When the gathering dispersed, Dasharatha returned to the lattice window where the night had once pressed so heavily. The Sarayu moved as it always did, carrying silt and moonlight and the small secrets of banks and boats. The king rested his palm against the cool stone. "Let this be the beginning," he said, not to the river, not to the city, but to the silence that had finally learned a new shape. Behind him, the palace lived in a quieter way than before. It was not relief, not yet. It was steadiness, which is sometimes the truest form of joy. And beyond the far edge of the roof, where the sky had deepened to gold, time turned, slowly, deliberately, toward birth. The vow did not end with the smoke. It settled into the days that followed. Courtyards returned to their usual rhythms, but the palace held a quiet center, as if an unseen hand had adjusted something inside its walls. News traveled not in words but in looks. Servants moved with unspoken care. The queen's attendants smiled without explaining why, and the king found that his steps no longer echoed like a question. The seasons turned. Monsoon shouldered in with its dark shoulders and silver threads. Roof edges sang. The Sarayu lifted and spoke in a fuller voice. In the inner chambers, the old women, keepers of herbs, oils, and small reliable customs, became busier than the priests. Laughter began to return in thin, bright lines. The midwives marked calendars. The palace stored ghee and grain not only for worship, but for a future that would soon need milk and lullabies. When the rains were done and the sky cleared to a rinsed blue, omens came in a language even the skeptical could read. Lamps that refused to sputter, jasmine that flowered past its habit, cows that offered more milk than the pails could hold. Dasher Atha walked less at night. He stood often at the thresholds of the queen's apartments, speaking softly to those who kept watch, leaving before his hope could become a burden. On a dawn washed with gold, the palace woke to footsteps that did not hurry but did not pause. The first cry, sharp, alive, cut through the quiet like a clean bell. Then another, softer. Then two more, in close answer, as if the day itself had decided to speak in chorus. By noon, the women had done the work women have always done, and the city began to fill with careful joy. Kausalya held a son whose gaze seemed already to know what patience was. Kaikeyi cradled a child with a quick, keen light in his face. Sumitra, smiling with a calm that steadied the room, drew close two infants who quieted when their hands found each other. The king entered with the humility of a guest. He did not touch the children at first. He looked at them the way a man looks at a river he has always known, but is seeing for the first time. When he finally lifted the eldest, the small weight changed his posture more than the crown ever had. Vasishta came later, the way he always came, without ceremony, exactly on time. He blessed the children, the mothers, the house. In the courtyard, a low fire burned, not for sacrifice now, but for warmth and scent. The sage spoke the names as one speaks a truth already present, only waiting to be called. Kausalya's son, he said, touching the child's brow, shall be Rama. He turned to Kaikeyi and smiled at the restless eyes of her boy. This one is Bharata. Then to Sumitra, who lifted first one child, then the other, as if they were a single sentence. These two will keep each other's measure. The elder is Lakshmana, the younger is Shatrugna. The names found their places in the rooms the way light finds corners. They settled into conversation, into lullabies, into the writing of priests who would one day make lists that others would call history. Ayodhya celebrated without waste. Food moved outward from the palace gates, bright cloth braided the streets. At night, lamps turned the river into a broken chain of gold. The king stood on a terrace and listened, not to cheers, though there were many, but to the quieter sounds beneath them. A city breathing with relief, a promise expanding into its proper size. Years began to explain the names. Rama learned quickly and deeply, but without hurry. He watched before he acted, and when he acted, the act seemed inevitable. Lakshmana's loyalty was not loud, it was constant. If Rama rose, Lakshmana had already taken one step with him. Bharata loved order and justice with a careful mind, asking questions that made the elders nod. Shatrughna found laughter easily and loyalty just as easily. Where Bharata stood, Shatrughna stood a half-step nearer. The princes trained in archery under masters chosen by Vasishta, men who cared more for the steadiness of a hand than the flash of a shot. Rama's arrows flew true not only because his eye was keen, but because his mind did not wander once it had chosen a line. In the practice yard, Lakshmana's breath could be heard matching Rama's rhythm, as if the bowstring were pulled by two hearts. In the classrooms under painted eaves, Bharata's clay tablets filled with neat, uncompromising lines. Shatrughna's with notes that somehow made hard lessons seem less hard. Kausalya watched with the still joy of someone whose prayers had become persons. Kaikeyi, sharp-eyed and exacting, found pride bending into tenderness more often than she expected. Sumitra, whose hands had guided two newborns on the same morning, learned to soothe bruised knees and hurt pride with the same steady warmth. Dasharatha aged in a way that made him seem younger. The worry that had once made his shoulders a fortress loosened its grip. He still ruled, and he ruled well, but the burden of future had become a story he could imagine to the end. It was on a winter morning, clear and clean, that the quiet of the palace was disturbed by a visitor whose presence carried its own weather. The guards drew back with the instinct men have when they know the rank of what approaches is not marked by jewels or banners. Vasishta met the guest at the first courtyard. They greeted one another with the friendship of old colleagues who have often done difficult things together. "Welcome, Vishwamitra," said Vasishta. The sage of the forests inclined his head. His eyes were the color of rivers in shadow. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, and yet the stone beneath their feet seemed to listen. "I have come with a request for the king," he said, "and for the boys he has raised." In the audience hall, Dasharatha rose from his seat before the visitor had crossed half the distance. Respect is a language, and he spoke it without accent. "What service can Ayodhya give to one who needs so little?" he asked. Vishwamitra did not take the throne's shadow. He stood where the light was plain. "There are rights in the forest," he said, "rights that ask for peace to grow. They are troubled by those who know only disturbance. I would have your son guard them while I complete the work." Dasharatha's hand tightened on the arm of the chair. "My armies." "Not armies," Vishwamitra said mildly. His gaze moved past the king to the boys standing with their teacher. "Rama, and the brother who breathes with him." The hall changed in the small way a room changes when its center shifts. Rama stepped forward and bowed. Lakshmana did the same, not as echo, but as agreement. Vasishta watched the king, he watched the boys, he watched the space between all three. Dasharatha's first answer was the answer of a father. His second was the answer of a king. He looked at Vasishta, not for permission, but for clarity. The old sage gave him that gift with a single nod. "Let the boys go," Vasishta said. "They will return changed, but change is the shape of growth." The king stood, and in standing, let go of something no one else could see. He turned to his sons and found them already prepared, not with armor and show, but with the simple readiness of those who have been taught to trust their own training. "Go with honor," he said. "Go with care. Return with the peace you take from here." Kausalya pressed a small, thread-bound charm into Rama's hand. It was not for magic, but for memory. Sumitra touched Lakshmana's shoulder and smiled in the quiet way that had steadied him since his first breath. Kaikeyi's eyes were bright. The words she chose were few and strong. At the gate, the city did not crowd. It stood back and watched, as one watches sunrise after a night that had reasons to be long. Vishwamitra walked ahead with the pace of a man who intends to arrive. Rama and Lakshmana followed, light-footed, sure, bows wrapped in plain cloth, quivers balanced low. From the terrace, Dasharatha kept them in sight until the road bent south and the view surrendered. He stayed there a time, the winter sun on his face, the cold on his hands, the old fear and the new pride learning how to live side by side. When he finally turned back into the palace, Ayodhya felt both larger and more precise, as if the leaving of two boys had thrown every remaining thing into sharper focus. By afternoon, the city's sounds returned, vendors calling, wheels on stone, the small music of daily life. In the forest, the trail narrowed to a path birds knew. Vishwamitra did not speak more than he needed to. The silence between them had a shape, and inside it, Rama began to understand that the world beyond the city's walls was not wild so much as unwatched. Night reached out its first long fingers. They stopped where the trees made a circle of safety. Vishwamitra sat, and the boys sat with him. The fire they built was modest and exact, like everything that would matter from now on. "Tomorrow," the sage said, "we begin the work." Rama looked into the flame and saw, not visions, but the steady line of his own breath. Lakshmana felt the promise coil in his chest the way a bowstring holds its calm before the draw. Above them, the sky was a clean, cold sheet. Somewhere in the scrub, a jackal called and then thought better of it. Ayodhya slept, not knowing that the story it had waited for had already stepped off its doorstep. The Sarayu moved on, carrying the news in the only way rivers do, by going where they must, and by making the going beautiful. The forest did not greet them with fear. It greeted them with a kind of listening. Leaves held still when they passed, the path thinned and then recovered under their feet. Vishwamitra walked ahead, staff angling the light. Rama and Lakshmana kept the pace that soldiers use when they might need to sprint without warning. They stopped by a stream that spoke to itself over flat stones. The sage filled a copper cup, offered it to Rama, then to Lakshmana, and only then drank. "There are powers you must learn," he said, "not for display, for steadiness." He taught them Bala and Atibala, simple in sound, exact in practice, hymns that tightened the mind and kept hunger and sleep from stealing judgment. When they recited, the forest seemed to lean closer, as if recognizing an old tune. By noon, the path bent into a low valley where air moved differently. Birds abandoned a patch of sky, monkeys argued and then went silent. Vishwamitra rested the tip of his staff on the ground. "Here," he said, "Tataka walks." The name landed like a cold breeze. Lakshmana's hand brushed the curve of his bow. Rama's gaze measured the tree line, the tall grass, the distance to water. He heard nothing, and it was the kind of nothing that means something is near. They felt her before they saw her, a pressure in the air, a weight in the green. She broke the brush like a storm breaks cloud, broad-shouldered, skin the color of dusk, hair a black river freed from its banks. Her voice found them first, a rough music. "Who brings fire where I keep dark?" "Stand," said Vishwamitra, calm as if naming constellations. "Rama." Rama stepped forward. Tataka's eyes were not wild. They were wounded in an old, stubborn way, as if she had learned to be a storm after trying to be rain. She smiled without mirth, showing teeth that had decided long ago to end things rather than argue with them. Lakshmana lifted his bowstring just enough to hum. "Say the word," he breathed. Rama did not say it. He asked the question that had already formed. "She is a woman," he said quietly to the sage. "Is this justice?" "Justice is not costume," Vishwamitra said. "It is alignment. Tataka ends what cannot defend itself. She has been asked to stop by those who had the right to ask. She did not. End her power. Leave nothing of it to rot back into the roots." Tataka moved closer, stones cracking under her heels. She lifted a boulder and cast it. Rama's arrow split the air, one thought, one line. The rock broke in a clean burst. The pieces fell like hard rain around them. She roared, trees shivered and shed old bark. The fight did not last long. True fights rarely do. Rama stepped into the rhythm that every master eventually recognizes. The world narrows to the distance between breath and target. Arrows built a quiet geometry around Tataka, warning, hurting, concluding. When he loosed the final shot, it traveled as if the air had been waiting for it. She staggered, reached for something that was not there, and fell in a thunder that startled even the sky. Silence spread. It was not triumph, it was order, restored to the place that had requested it. Rama lowered his bow. Lakshmana's breath evened out, matching his brother's without needing to see him. Vishwamitra nodded once, neither pleased nor grim. Correct, that was all. "We go," he said. The grove beyond the valley opened like a hand. A small rise took wind well, and the sage stood there to teach what rites would need. "Rakshasas come like weather," he said. "Learn to read them. Some you outlast, some you outrun, some you end." He taught mantras older than the paths, and when the boys repeated them, the meanings landed where meanings are supposed to live, just behind the ribs, not far from the heart. 2 nights later, The forest announced guests again, the wrong kind. Smoke that wasn't theirs, footfalls that liked their own noise. Sabahu arrived with laughter that broke things, Maricha with a smile that said he would rather bend a rule than break a stone. They did not bother with words. Sabahu hurled filth toward the altar just as the rites began. Rama's arrow took him mid-motion. He pitched forward and met earth without glory. Maricha leapt, fast and light, but light cheats only until someone brings a brighter one. Rama remembered the sage's measure of force and mercy, chose a weapon that humbles rather than ends. When he loosed the astral shaft, it struck Maricha like a verdict and threw him far, so far that the sea had to learn his name before it could calm him. The rites finished. The flame was steady. What had asked for peace received it. Vishwamitra let the quiet hold for a time and then drew the brothers aside. "Weapons are not iron and string only," he said. "They are vows." He taught them the calls for weapons of flame and frost, of sleep and light, of binding and release. He taught the counters, too, because power without a cancel is just a habit looking for a ruin. When they had learned enough to stop asking for more, the sage turned the road east. "There is a bow in Mithila," he said. "A king keeps it as kings keep the rain they cannot command. We go for the festival, we go for the sight of it, and perhaps for more." They crossed fields that had fed cities and will again. Villagers called to them without knowing why. The brothers answered with the easy courtesy of those who have nothing to prove. The walls of Mithila rose not to intimidate but to explain order, craft, proportion. Inside, streets ran straight as decisions. Banners held color like water holds sky. King Janaka welcomed the sage the way a wise man welcomes another, without pretending he is surprised. "You have brought students," he said, eyes on Rama and Lakshmana. "The city likes students. They ask better questions than princes." "They may be both by the time they leave," Vishwamitra said, half smiling. The court talked of the bow the way sailors talk of a wind that comes once in a generation. It was Shiva's, they said, a relic that outlived reason. It rested in a hall of cedar and bronze where sound went to become memory. Suitors had tried, suitors had failed. The rule was simple: lift the bow, string it, ask for the girl whose courage matched a god's old weapon. Failing had its own ceremony. Rama did not posture. Lakshmana did not urge him. They walked the city, ate the city's food, and listened to the stories people tell when they are proud without danger. A young woman in a plain veil passed them near a courtyard where girls were stringing marigolds into ropes. She did not look up, and yet the air changed when she crossed it. Rama felt the shift as one feels a key click home in a lock one has held for a long time without knowing which door it belongs to. "Tomorrow," said Vishwamitra that night by a lamp that made a circle of gold on a low table. "The hall opens, the bow waits. Bring no hurry, bring only your full self." Rama slept without dreams, which is its own kind of sign. Lakshmana guarded the sleep as if it were a city, then let it guard him back. At dawn, the hall filled with a careful crowd. The bow lay on a carved stand, bronze clamps like quiet hands at either end. It was longer than a man and heavier than rumor had promised. Priests stood ready, not hopeful, not cynical, simply ready. Janaka entered and the room steadied around him. His daughter, Sita, took a place nearby, her presence unadorned and unafraid. Suitors came with rings of men, with words that had been polished more than their deeds. They pressed, they grunted, they failed with grace or without it. The bow did what it always did, sat, patient and absolute, as if reminding everyone that gods do not need anyone to believe in them to be what they are. Vishwamitra inclined his head toward Rama. No command, no speech. A gesture a teacher makes when the lesson has walked to the edge of itself and asks to go on. Rama stepped forward. He did not glance at the crowd or the girl or the king. He laid his hand on the bow as if greeting an elder. For a small breath, the hall forgot how to breathe. Then he lifted. The wood answered his touch the way a well-made instrument answers a musician, first with silence, then with a note you feel in the bones. The bow rose. Rama set one end to the ground and drew it toward the string. Somewhere behind him, Lakshmana's shoulders loosened, as if a burden he had not admitted to carrying had just confessed itself and left. In front of him, Sita's eyes steadied, not widening, not fleeing, steady as a flame in a room that has learned how to keep wind out. The bow bent. It bent as if remembering a shape it had not been asked to make in human time. The string neared the notch. And then a sound rose, deep and clean, like a mountain choosing to speak. Wood remembered God's strength, bronze remembered fire. The string touched the notch. The bow broke. It did not shatter, it declared. A single thunder split the hall and rolled through Mithila like a storm that had found its name. Dust leapt from beams, lamps trembled and held. When the echo finally let go, Rama stood with half a bow in either hand, calm as if he had only set down a burden the world had been carrying wrong. Silence tipped into breath. Priests exhaled. Courtiers found their feet. Janaka's face opened into the honest awe of a man who has seen the exact answer to a question he thought was too large to ask. Sita did not startle. Her eyes met Rama's for the first time, and what moved between them was not lightning or poetry. It was recognition, swift, precise, simple. Vishwamitra bowed his head the smallest degree, a teacher satisfied not by spectacle but by rightness. Lakshmana's grin, rare, involuntary, broke and was gone, leaving only pride. Janaka stepped forward. "The vow of this hall is fulfilled," he said, voice steady, "and so is mine." He signaled, and attendants brought garlands that smelled of rain. Sita took one in both hands. She walked to Rama with a pace that neither hurried nor hesitated. When she placed the garland around his neck, the hall felt larger, as if every wall had pulled back to make room for the shape of what had just been named. Outside, Mithila woke all at once. Bells, drums, the wild, bright happiness that cities keep ready for the rare days when joy arrives without bargaining. Inside, vows were spoken, measured and clear. The date was fixed. Messengers rode in 4 directions. Ayodhya's road learned the news before its dust had time to settle from the last rider who had used it. That night, the palace courtyards carried the perfume of flowers and roasted grain. People sat long after the lamps were lit, trading stories that would harden into legend by morning. Rama stood at an upper balcony, quiet, watching the city turn radiant under simple light. Lakshmana joined him and leaned on the stone rail. "Do you ever feel," Lakshmana said softly, "that the day arrives a heartbeat before you're ready for it, and somehow that is exactly right?" Rama smiled. "Often." Below, Sita crossed a garden path, her hand brushing the tops of marigolds as if to greet them. She paused, looked up, and in that glance the future moved again. No thunder, no crack of wood, just the certain pivot of a wheel that had found the true center of its axle. Far away in Ayodhya, Dasharatha rose before dawn without knowing why, walked to the same lattice window where he had once bargained with silence, and found his breath arriving lighter than it had in years. The Saryu slid by, carrying starlight and rumor. In the morning, the weddings would be arranged not just for Rama and Sita, but for Bharata and Mandavi, for Lakshmana and Urmila, for Shatrughna and Shrutakiyati. The wide braid of two houses made in one day. The world, however, never leaves joy unchallenged for long. The road home would bring a throne room filled with songs, a father's tears, and a mother's eyes that held more than love. Destiny had already put down its markers, quiet as chess pieces waiting for hands. Part 4, Weddings and a Wound in the Silk. Mithila war celebration like a river wears light. Courtyards brimmed with music that never leaned into noise. Garlands bridged balconies like soft ropes of sunrise. Oil lamps multiplied in every reflective surface until the night itself seemed to approve. The vows were spoken in the old cadence, the kind that makes even children fall still for reasons they cannot name. Rama and Sita stood beneath a canopy of jasmine, with the steady grace of two truths finally permitted to stand side by side. When the priest's hand circled the fire for the last time, their eyes met not as strangers made brave by ritual, but as allies who had walked separate paths to the same door and found it unlocked. Nearby, Lakshmana and Urmila exchanged glances that were equal parts mischief and loyalty. Bharata and Mandavi's smiles were quieter, precise. Shatrughna and Shrutakiyati learned, in a single ceremony, how laughter and respect can share a home. The days that followed were a careful embroidery of farewell and welcome. Janaka's gifts were exact without ostentation. Craftsmanship that asked to be used, cloth that wanted to be worn, words that would not spoil with repetition. When the time came to leave, the king of Vaidha embraced Rama with the muted ache of a father who recognizes what he is gaining even as he names what he must let go. The caravan bent south in a ribbon of color, flags curving against a forgiving wind. Villages spilled to their thresholds to watch. Women lifted children so they could remember later that they had seen the day beauty traveled past their doors with modesty. At night, the company halted by clean water and low trees. Stories found their own listeners. The new brides discovered that the road teaches its own tenderness, how to make comfort from little, how to weigh a pause correctly. Idea rose on the horizon the way memory rises in the mind, already known, yet new again. Drums welcomed them, not with frenzy, but with joy hammered into rhythm by hands that knew what to do with it. Dasharatha received his sons and daughters with a face that had relearned light. Kausalia's blessing rested on Sita like a shawl. Kaikeyi's embrace was exact, formal, and after a heartbeat, warmer than that. Sumitra's eyes held pride that found its voice later, in private, over small bowls of sweet milk. Months passed in a right order. The city breathed easily. The princes took their measure of governance as a craftsman takes a tool, without showing off, without pretending the work was born that day. Rama's judgments stitched edges that had been fraying. Bharata's counsel was the kind that improves a decision without taking credit. Lakshmana arrived wherever trouble forgot to announce itself. Shatrughna made enemies smaller by noticing what they were made of. Then came a summer dawn with a good haze to it, and with it a decision that had stalked Dasharatha's mind for weeks, wearing patience into a shape that could finally stand. He summoned the council. The arguments, when they came, were brief not because there were none, but because the best reason had arrived ahead of them and sat down in the central chair. Rama, he said aloud in the hall, and the name sounded like relief, shall be crowned Yuvaraja. The announcement flowed through Ayodhya before the ink could dry on the priest's hand. Merchants pressed coin into palm and asked for no change. Potters lined the streets with new lamps that wanted only a match and an evening. Even the river seemed to move with an extra surface brightness, as if the sun had found a kinder angle from which to read it. Fate does not love a straight line. It brings a knot. This one arrived on an old woman's tongue. Manthara had lived in the palace long enough to know which stones had warmed under which footsteps. She measured Kaikeyi's joy with a tailor's eye and decided it hung too loosely on the queen's shoulders. She bent her back and her voice to the task of drawing the future an inch to the left. "My lady," she said, making sorrow a kind of music, "do you not see what they will take while calling it a gift? Rama crowned today is Bharata forgotten tomorrow." Kaikeyi laughed at the thought, at first. The two boys had been milk from the same pitcher with Lakshmana and Shatrughna never far. But Manthara did not bring arguments. She brought pictures. She painted rooms where Kaikeyi's kindness would be read as absence, where her son would bow forever to a crown that had not even looked his way before choosing where to rest. She asked what would be left in the queen's hands when ceremonies had finished and garlands had died. Words are tools, in the wrong hands they are also weather. A doubt, once allowed inside, does not need to be true to be efficient. Kaikeyi's breath shortened by degrees, the room seemed to tilt. Manthara reminded her of a night on a battlefield when Dasharatha had promised 2 boons and gone to sleep with his debt intact. "Ask," the maid murmured, "not later now." Kaikeyi did not sleep in her chamber that night. She went to the Kopa Bhavan, the room designed not for rage but for its cooling, and sat on the floor as if farther from the throne she might be closer to something honest. When Dasharatha, glowing with plans, came to bring her news he assumed would delight, he found shadow where he had expected ease. "Tell me," he said, What grief sits here where garlands should? Not grief, Kaikeyi answered, her voice even. Memory, you owe me 2 boons. A king does not forget the price of his breath. Dasharatha nodded slowly, the past arriving like the tide, firm, indifferent to present walls. Ask, he said. And she did not flinch. Send Rama to the forest for 14 years, she said. Crown Bharata in his stead. There are silences that have shape. This one fell between them like a column of cold air. Dasharatha's hands rose and then found no use for themselves. He pleaded not as a king pleads for a treaty, but as a father bargains with a dour, quiet, wild, foolish human. Kaikeyi's eyes held a brightness that did not belong to triumph. It belonged to someone who has convinced herself that a necessary pain is a form of courage. Keep your word, she said, or lose the man you say you are. He could not unmake his promise without unmaking the spine that had held a kingdom upright. When his voice came back, it had grown old in an hour. I will tell him, he said, and discovered he could not rise. He did not have to. Rama entered, summoned by the kind of whisper that travels faster than messengers. He took in the room in one sweep, his father's ruin, his stepmother's set jaw, the space his name had left in the air. What must be done? He asked. Kaikeyi spoke, and Rama listened without letting the words grow teeth. When she finished, he bowed, and the bow was not performance. It was the precise shape of a promise kept by more than one person at the same time. 14 years, he repeated, as if measuring a length of cloth. Very well. Dasharatha tried to speak and managed only a sound that had the wrong edges. Not you, he meant to say, not this. Rama knelt and took his father's hand. Your word lives, he said. That is the road I walk. He went to Kausalya first, the way men go to the place they learned what mercy looks like. She grieved as mothers grieve, aloud and without shame, then found, in the middle of that grief, the muscle that has always lifted houses and carried them across bad water. If Dharma is the weather, she said, wiping his face with a steady palm, be the tree that does not break. Sita listened to the news without betraying surprise. Where you stand is where the vow stands, she said simply. If that is a hut, it is a hut. If that is thorns, we will learn their names. I will not be the wife of your memory. He argued for the shape of the argument, comfort, safety, the city's needs, his duty to leave burdens behind. She cut each cord gently and left the knot undone. Do not make me small to make the world tidy, she said. I know the weight I ask to carry. Lakshmana's decision was not speech, it was direction. If a door opens for you, he told Rama, I step through second. He went to Sumitra for blessing and received the kind that makes men taller without changing their height. Go where Rama goes, she said. Return when his shadow touches this threshold again. Morning came with a ceremonial clarity that felt cruel in its efficiency. The chariot waited. Sumitra held the reins like a man holding the end of a story he did not want to read aloud. Citizens gathered, panic diluting their joy into something thin and sharp. Some called out, most did not. They followed as far as they dared, stopping where duty returned them to shops, to children, to seeds that cannot be left waiting only because a king has learned the cost of his promises. At the last city gate, Rama turned and bowed to Ayodhya itself. The wind lifted and set down a few grains of dust as if to mark the gesture in the smallest handwriting. The road beyond rounded into trees and rumor. The Sarayu glittered to their right like an ally allowed to walk parallel. By noon, they reached the ford at Shringavarapura, where Gyuha, lord of the Nishadas, kept watch with the talent of a man who has taught himself to sleep with one eye and trust only what his own calloused palms have tested. He recognized Rama not by jewels, there were none now, but by the way the air arranged itself around him. "My king," Gyuha said, and the word carried no treachery, "my boats are yours." They crossed as evening laid copper on the water. On the far bank, the world smelled different, more honest, less arranged. Birds argued themselves to sleep. In the distance, a jackal laughed at a joke he told himself every night and never found less funny. They slept that first night under a sky uncomplicated by roofs. Rama lay awake listening to how the forest thinks, in layers, in whispers, in the arithmetic of living things that never needed a court to settle their accounts. Beside him, Sita slept, then woke, then slept again. Lakshmana kept a watch he did not resent. In Ayodhya, Dasharatha sat at the lattice window that had once taught him how heavy silence can be. He listened now to a different silence, the one that follows a blow, the one that does not know where to put its hands. Somewhere in the palace, Manthara measured her triumph and found it smaller than she had imagined. Kaikeyi pressed her forehead to cool stone and waited for a peace that would not come to the name she used for it. At dawn, Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana rose and turned south, toward hermitages and river bends, and the kind of knowledge that sits outside city gates and refuses to be brought in. The road, which knows more stories than any bard, accepted their footsteps and did what roads do when they are given the right travelers. It became, for a time, the straightest thing in a world that refuses to be simple. Morning found them in a hush that felt chosen, not imposed. Mist rose from the river in slow ribbons. Gyuha's men pushed the last boat into reeds and faded back into their own lives with the soft efficiency of people who never announce their kindness. Sumantra lingered, unwilling to turn the chariot toward a city that would not forgive the sound of wheels returning without those it loved. "Go back," Rama told him gently. "Tell my father I am well. Tell my mothers I am not cold." Sumantra bowed until his forehead touched the earth. He turned the horses, each step a protest and an obedience at once, and the road gathered him the way a spool gathers thread. Southward, the land changed its handwriting, less script, more stone. They reached the confluence where rivers speak to each other in currents. There, the ashram of Bharadwaja held a circle of order in the untidy green. The sage welcomed them as if finishing a sentence he had started years ago. "You seek a place not to hide," Bharadwaja said, "but to be seen by what should see you. Go to Chitrakoot. The hill knows how to hold quiet without swallowing it. Build there. Learn there." He gave them fruits, a map that lived only in directions, walk by the blue rock until the wind changes, and a blessing that felt like shade at noon. When they left, even the birds watched them with a courtesy that looked like understanding. Chitrakoot rose not like a challenge but like an answer. Water slipped out from under dark stone. The hill's flanks wore trees the way old men wear shawls, closer at dawn, open at dusk. Rama chose a shelf of ground facing the stream. Lakshmana measured the space with his hands and his eye. By evening, a hut stood, leaf thatch, bamboo ribs, a doorway that learned each of their shadows. Sita laid a mat. She tied her hair back with grass fiber and laughed at the knot when it held. "This will do," she said simply. Her voice gave the hut a second shape, the one only a voice can give. They learned the forest's timetable. Dawn brought peacocks that believed themselves to be thunder. Noon brought the stillness of sentences that do not want to be interrupted. Dusk brought the quick mathematics of wings and water. Lakshmana dug a little channel to keep rain from running a river straight through their floor. Rama cut a walking path that curved just enough to remind feet that life is not a straight line, even when the heart aches for one. At night they sat by a small, exact fire. Rama told Sita the names of stars in a tone that made each sound like a neighbor. Lakshmana, less given to naming the sky, kept his ears on the dark between the trees and found that he liked its honesty. In sleep, the hill seemed to breathe with them. In waking, it felt like a companion who had sworn silence and kept it well. Back in Ayodhya, Sumantra delivered his message and could not stay for the echo it caused. The city tried to go about its tasks with the dignity of a courtesan required to dance without music. Dasharatha drifted between the throne room and the lattice window until the two places learned each other's smell. One midnight, words broke out of him not as speech, but as past. "Kaiki, you have given me a crown without a head." Before dawn, he spoke Rama's name like a lamp cupped in both hands and let go of breath. The palace did what palaces do when they cannot accept the news they are designed to carry. It held perfectly still and waited for someone to tell it what to feel. Bharata returned from Kekaya to a city that would not look him in the eye. His questions found walls. His feet found the Kopabhavan. Kaiki, composed and brittle, told him the facts as if facts were water in a clay pot that never leaks. "Your brother is gone to the forest. The crown waits for you. This is justice performed without theater." Something old in Bharata stood. He walked to his father's chamber, touched the unanswering hand, and wept the way just men weep, without shame, without bargaining, without telling grief how long it may stay. Then he rose and asked only one thing: "Where?" The answer carried him south with a river's certainty. He did not come alone. Ministers followed because custom drags like a net, soldiers because love sometimes lacks imagination, citizens because rumor, when it touches love, becomes pilgrimage. The caravan bent the horizon. Gyuha saw dust first, then banners, then the heavy line of decisions. He armed his men without anger. "A city does not bring elephants to embrace," he said, but his eye, when it fell on Bharata dismounting at the river, softened. "My friend," Bharata said, putting down rank like a sack, Do not mistake the size of my grief for the shape of my intention. I will not touch a hair on my brother's head. Lend me a boat. Lend me faith." Gyuha measured the man in front of him the way boatmen measure water: depth, current, truth. "I will lend you both," he said, and did. The army stayed. A smaller party crossed, led by a prince who looked more like a supplicant than a claimant. Bharadwaja, hearing the river speak in a new tone, stepped to his hermitage gate and found the second prince at his threshold. He fed them, as is the law and the pleasure of such houses, then asked the single question needed. "What do you come to take?" "It's only what he will give," Bharata answered. "And if he gives nothing, I will take his refusal and carry it home on my head." "Then eat," the sage said, smiling. "The forest prefers its arguments made on a full stomach." Morning reached for the hill. In the hut at Chitrakoot, Sita was plaiting her hair. Lakshmana was binding the day's arrows. Rama stepped outside and felt the ground tell him company was near. He smiled, not because he expected joy or sorrow, but because he expected truth. They heard voices on the path, soft at first, then certain. A figure appeared between sal trunks, walking not like a petitioner, not like a rival, but like a brother arriving at the only door that does not need knocking. "Rama," Bharata said. Rama's face changed in the careful way stone changes under sudden light. He went forward and in 3 steps was holding the man who had shared his bread, his lessons, his childhood. Behind them, Lakshmana's hand, which had been near his bow without asking permission, fell to his side. He bowed to Bharata with a mix of apology and relief that made Sita smile in the corner of her mouth. They sat beneath a tree whose leaves made a sound like cloth being folded neatly. The hill listened. The stream pretended it had other appointments. Words came and arranged themselves without waste. "Father is gone," Bharata said, and the air acknowledged a truth it had suspected. "And I bring you what should have been brought on a day that was stolen, Ayodhya's will, which is your will, which must move through your hands." Rama did what he always did to grief. He honored it by not trying to distract it. When he spoke, it was the same voice that had calmed frightened horses and inflamed soldiers to restraint. "Our father's word is alive in this forest," he said. "If I cut it down here, I will have to plant a lie in Ayodhya to replace it. I cannot rule from a root that shallow." Bharata bowed his head. "Then rule from absence," he said simply. He set a small wooden pair of sandals before his brother, the kadau polished by a night's worth of resolve. "Place your feet here. Let these carry the weight your body refuses. I will govern not as king, but as steward. Your name will be the sun, I will be the dial." Silence moved through the grove, not as emptiness, but as assent. Sita looked at Rama, and in her look was the whole map of a law kept without turning harsh. Lakshmana's eyes shone with the fierce relief of a man who discovers that duty and love sometimes choose the same road. Rama stepped onto the sandals. Wood received him like a promise. He lifted them and placed them back into Bharata's hands. "Rule cleanly," he said. "Rule briefly. Live outside the city so that the throne remembers it is borrowed." a small smile sharper than a blade, and remind the ministers that no decree outlives the tree it harms. Bharata nodded. I will live at Nandigrama on the edge of sight. I will dress like the vow you keep. When the 14th year ends, even if the clock runs one beat slow, I will light the road myself. They embraced as if sealing a jar of something that must not spoil. By noon, the party turned north. Gyuha's boats did their work without remark. The army learned, by the angle of its prince's shoulders, that victory sometimes looks like obedience. On Chitrakoot, dusk combed the hill with long, amber teeth. Sita spread the evening mat. Lakshmana checked the trench against rain. Rama stood at the edge of their small clearing and looked toward a city he could not see. 14 years, he said, not as arithmetic, but as a kind of music with exactly that many beats. He let the number settle into the trees, the stream, the thatch, and the space between his ribs. Behind him, the fire took. The pot sang, night arrived on its soft-soled feet. And the forest, satisfied that the house within it understood its own heart, closed its green hands around the hut without once making a fist. Seasons rounded off their edges and slid past. In Chitrakoot, the years were not counted by festivals, but by small repairs. The way a door learns to close without argument, the way a path understands feet and stops pretending to be wild. Sages came and went, carrying questions and fruits. News reached them the way rivers learn gossip, from bends, from birds, from men who walk farther than they meant to and are glad for an excuse to rest. One winter evening, when the hill's shadow stretched like a banner over the stream, a group of ascetics arrived with the particular stillness of people who have cut their lives close to the bone. Their leader, sharp-eyed and gentle, spoke after the first bowl of warm milk. Dandaka calls, he said. The hermitages there are tired of mourning. Those who live by disruption have turned fear into attacks. We can pray here, or we can ask you to come. Rama looked at Sita. She did not need to answer with words. In Lakshmana's hands, the bowstring hummed like a low, ready note. They broke the hut down to what could be remade and left the rest for the hill to keep. The path south changed its grammar, trees closer, undergrowth louder, light sliced into ribbons that did not always agree on what to show. Dandaka did not welcome or deny. It watched. Hermitages opened like clearings in a sentence. Men and women who had made a law of quiet greeted the three with a relief that tried not to look like relief. At night, when the little fires were banked, Rama listened to stories of ambushes, stolen grain, rights overturned by hands that liked ruining more than they liked bread. In the morning, he walked the perimeter and taught a different rhythm. The first jackal men came at dusk, loping toward a shrine where a thin bell shook as if asking permission to speak. Rama's arrow found the forward shoulder, not to end but to halt. The second arrow ended. Lakshmana used fewer shafts than his anger asked for. He kept to Rama's count as if it were the only arithmetic worth learning. Word traveled. The forest, which knows every rumor before it is born, passed along a new one. The shrines have a spine again. Weeks folded into months. Rama's face leaned down to the work until it wore the look craftsmen share when they forget to separate duty from pleasure. Sita learned the plants that heal and the ones that pretend to heal. She sat with women who had not spoken about fear because there had not been a safe word for it. She lent the word and the safety. Lakshmana learned the crossings where footprints double back and the shadowed hollows where cowards wait. When he slept, his hand still knew where the bow lay. South of the Godavari, the forest softened at the edges as if some large thought had tired of being severe. On a rise that watched water slide left, they found Panchavati, 5 old trees keeping the kind of company only the old know how to keep. Birds defended the branches as if they had bought them. Monkeys argued in 3 dialects and understood none. The air smelled of river skin and crushed leaf. "This," Lakshmana said, already measuring. "Here." Rama smiled. "Here." By noon a hut stood, clean-lined and exact. The door faced east so that light would arrive as a guest, not an intruder. Lakshmana raised a palisade of interlaced saplings and set a narrow gate that would force even haste to show its face. Sita hung a garland above the lintel and laughed at the way bees assumed it was an error they could correct. They became neighbors with the river. Mornings were straight-backed and clear. A dip, a prayer, a simple meal, the day's repairs. Afternoons stretched. The heat made even birds reconsider their opinions. In the evenings, they sat under one of the big 5 trees and let the world be. Sometimes Rama spoke, small memories of Ayodhya, a scent that belonged only to winter near the palace kitchens, the way the Sarayu looked just before the fishermen gave up on the day. Sometimes Sita told stories that had waited for someone worthy, tales of Vaidha, of plow lines and hidden gifts and a king whose vows fit his hands. Lakshmana, who preferred edges to centers, listened and let the words file his anger into a tool rather than a weight. Threats tested the fence because that is what threats do. Kara's scouts crept close, noses to the air. They returned with less than they came with. Lone braggarts tried courage on like a borrowed cloak. Lakshmana folded the cloak and sent it back with a warning stitched in. Once, in the rain, a pack came howling at the wrong hour. Rama sent 3 arrows. The forest learned the punctuation. Stop, consider, do not. Months later, when the heat relented and the river ran thin and glassy over its stones, a figure stepped out of the sal gloom with the confident clatter of someone who has always been answered. She was tall, hair thick as rope, eyes bright with want that had forgotten its manners. She looked at Rama and smiled in a way that announced itself as gift. "I am Shurpanaka," she said, as if the name should do more work than it did. "This hut is small for you. Come with me. I will show you caves that keep winter cool and summer kind." Sita's hand stilled over the basket she was weaving. Lakshmana's mouth tightened. He said nothing. Rama stood in that steady way of his, where refusal is neither insult nor apology. "I have taken a vow," he said. "It keeps me where I stand." She turned, quick as hunger, to Lakshmana. "Then you." He shook his head once. "My place is already chosen." Desire, when it goes unanswered, often borrows rage to pay its debts. Shurpanaka's face sharpened. Her voice lost the softness that had been pretending to be charm. "Then I will make space," she said, and reached for Sita with a hand used to taking. The bowstring sang. In one motion, Lakshmana stepped between the two women and drew a hard line across an old arrogance. Blood came sudden and bright. Shurpanakha's cry tore leaves from branches. She fled, blind with new shape and old fury. Her brothers, Lakshmana said, breathing even, will come. Rama nodded. Then let them come straight and leave straight. They came with noise enough to alert the dead. Kara, Dashana, and a crowd that mistook number for strength broke through the brush with spears lifted and mouths open. Rama stood in the gate and unstitched their charge with patient geometry. Arrows cut lines through the afternoon, left, right, center, high, low, halt. Kara swung a mace that promised to end things. It ended in dust. Dashana roared the way men roar when they want to frighten Proof. Proof did not hear him. Lakshmana held the right flank like a hinge. When it was done, the grove smelled of sap and iron, and the river went on with its business. Peace returned, though it watched the path more closely. Shurpanakha crossed dark miles and found her way to a court that loved display and revenge in equal measure. She offered her wound as argument. The argument found an ear that had been waiting to be tempted. Ravana listened and smiled, not because of the insult, but because the word Sita had entered his room. In Panchavati, the days continued in good order. Sita gathered wild lilies and learned where the river hid cold in late afternoon. Rama repaired a roof plate and retied the gate to creak just loudly enough to warn, but not enough to annoy. Lakshmana oiled bowstrings and watched the tree line the way a sailor watches a horizon line that has been too quiet for too long. One evening, a deer stepped into the clearing, gold as fresh coin, dappled with white that moved when it breathed. It was beautiful the way traps are beautiful, precisely, deliberately. Sita's face lit with the sudden, unguarded joy of a child who has forgotten to count the cost of wanting. "Rama," she said, almost laughing, "look." He looked and saw more than one thing. Beauty, yes. A pattern under beauty, a hand behind the pattern. He weighed the moment and the years it stood inside. "If it is real," she said softly, already knowing he knew, "we will have it, and if it is not, you will end a lie near our door." Rama slung his bow and smiled at her in the way he did when he refused to teach fear its lesson twice. "Keep the fire, keep Lakshmana, I will not be long." The deer flicked an ear and bounded, threading the trees as if the woods had been woven for it. Rama followed, patient, exact, letting distance be part of the hunt. Behind him, the light reached for the tops of the 5 old trees and found them where it had left them, waiting. Lakshmana stood in the gate, listening to the river, the birds, the space between. Sita set a pot on the coals and watched the path where Rama had stepped away, as one watches a sentence whose last word is known but has not yet been spoken. In the deep distance, a cry rose, Rama's voice, it seemed, edged with pain. The forest held still. Lakshmana's jaw set. His hand did not move from the bow. Sita looked up, eyes wide and certain, and the evening narrowed to a single choice. The river slid on, unhelpful, honest. The trees waited, like witnesses who have already decided to tell the truth. The deer ran like an idea that does not wish to be caught. It flashed between trunks, gold turning to shadow and back to gold, drawing Rama through a maze that seemed to fold behind him. He kept his breath even, the bow easy in his hand. 100 paces. 50. The air changed, thin sweetness under the green, the smell of a trick being set. He loosed an arrow when the path narrowed to a stone throat. The shaft flew true. The deer stumbled, bright hide flowering into something darker, Maricha's old, lean body revealed at last. He looked at Rama with the rueful smile of a player who has lost cleanly, then pulled breath into his chest and sent it out in another man's voice. Lakshmana, Sita, help! The cry carried like metal carries light. Birds burst from the canopy. The echo found Panchavati and placed itself at Sita's feet. Her fingers tightened on the rim of the clay pot. Lakshmana, she said, did you hear? He had heard. He had also heard the distance inside the sound. It is not him, he said. It is a voice thrown like a spear. Not him, she stood. You would risk him on a guess. He did not raise his voice. I risk him by leaving you. This is how the forest plays. It shakes one hand with you while the other hand reaches for your back. A second cry, fainter, as if tangled in leaves. Sita's face changed. The words came low and hard. If your loyalty is only to Rama, then do as he would do, go. If it is to me, then go because I ask it. Lakshmana closed his eyes for one beat and opened them changed. Forgive me, he said, not for choosing, but for the hurt his choosing would cause. He stepped to the threshold, drew a line on the earth with the point of his arrow, a clean curve bright as fresh water. No one crosses this, he said, voice flat with a soldier's faith in measures. Not you, not guest, not God in disguise. Name must ask name to enter. As she nodded, though her breath trembled. He went, fast and straight, into trees that did not slow him. Silence filled the hut as if poured there. Sita waited with both hands around a prayer that had no words, only shape. A shadow came to the doorway, bent under a mendicant's bowl. Alms, said a voice like cool ash. Alms for one who keeps ritual's path. She looked up. The man at the door wore saffron and dust, matted hair coiled like a river held in one place. Eyes old enough to remember when stone was young. Holy sir, Sita said, I will bring grain and fruit. She reached for the basket, then remembered the line like a living thing at her feet. Step forward and receive, she said, or bless me where you stand. The mendicant did not move. Hospitality is a fire you must carry to the guest, he murmured, or let the guest declare your house cold. The forest held its breath. Sita stood in the door's frame, the bowl in her hands, and weighed courtesy against caution. In the end, she chose the law of kindness she had been taught since childhood. She stepped across the line. The disguise let go of itself like a cloak falling. Saffron became silk dark as a storm. The ash burned off to reveal a face carved for power. Ravana's eyes were not hungry. Hunger is too small a word. They were certain. I am the Lord of Lanka, he said, as if that ended all questioning. Come. Sita's reply was not loud. You have named yourself. Now name the idea you serve. He did not answer. He reached. The air thickened, the world tilted. She struck at him with the only weapon she had left, words that did not beg. "Rama will find you," she said. "The path you choose is a house with one door." Ravana lifted her as a man might lift a stolen firebrand, careful of the burn he did not believe in. The ground shivered. The line at the threshold gleamed once and went quiet, holding its promise to the one who had drawn it, helpless before the one who had been invited past it. The sky lowered. The Pushpaka chariot shouldered through leaves like a ship parting reeds. In a whirl of petals and wind, they rose. Sita tore the edge of her sari and let pieces fall, bright markers thrown into the forest's memory. The cloth snagged on thorns, found branches, made a line of small stars for those who knew how to read. Not far away, an old vulture unfolded himself from a branch that had served him half a lifetime. Jatayu's wings were scarred and honest. He saw the chariot and what it held. The bones in him remembered oaths older than cities. He beat upward, each stroke a refusal. "Put her down," he called, voice raw with effort. "There are vows you cannot touch without losing the hands you used." Ravana sneered without turning his head. "Old bird, old bones." Jatayu struck. Talons found silk and skin, one wing drove like a blade. The chariot rocked, Sita's cry split wind. Ravana drew his sword, steel with a taste for names. The fight was brief, magnificent, without hope. The vulture tore a shoulder guard free, scored the king's arm, and paid with a wing. Feathers fell like slow rain. He struck again with his beak and took an ear. The sword answered. Red opened along his breast. The old heart pounded once like a drum for war, once for love, once for duty, and then still kept beating, stubborn, while the body fell. Sita reached for him as he dropped. The chariot tilted, then steadied and rushed south, a wound racing toward the sea. When Rama and Lakshmana burst from the trees into the clearing, the hut was whole and empty. The line at the threshold was unmarred. A single bee circled the garland and decided not to land. Rama's face did not change, the world behind it did. He moved through the clearing like a man walking through a room where the lamp has been stolen. They searched the periphery with the calm of those who know that panic is a hole with no ladder. Lakshmana found the first scrap of cloth on a thorn, Sita's border, gold thread dulled with sap. "Here," he said. Another 2 paces on. Another in a scrape where feet had slipped and then found air. They followed the trail out of the grove and into a long dip of land where grass lay pressed as if a great shadow had stooped to drink. A drag mark. Blood, not hers. Feathers, large and gray, bright at the shafts. They found Jatayu broken on a slope that fell toward a thin stream. He lifted his head when their shadows crossed him. His eye cleared with effort, and, seeing Rama, gentled. "Forgive me," he croaked. "I was not enough." "You were everything," Rama said, kneeling, one hand under the great head, the other over the shattered breast as if his palm could learn to be a second heart. "Tell me." Jatayu gave the story in fragments that did not need mending. Disguise, a line crossed, a chariot heavier than wind, Lanka, south. I held him, he said, and tried to smile. He is not a god, he bleeds. Rama's hand trembled for the first time. He bowed his head to the bird's torn crown the way a student bows to a master. Lakshmana brought water in his cupped hands. Jatayu drank like a child, eyes closing, the beak softening. Find her, he whispered. Let my name be a bridge you do not have to cross twice. The light had tilted when the heartbeat failed. They made a pyre with their own hands, not summoning help, not delegating honor. The flames rose slow and true. Rama stood without moving until the last feather learned to be smoke. Then he spoke so quietly that the fire seemed to lean closer. I will not leave a single mile of the south unmeasured, he said. I will empty the map. They walked until night pressed its weight on their shoulders. Sleep did not come. When it did, it came like a thief who leaves something behind instead of taking, an hour's numbness, nothing more. Morning brought a shape too large to be tree and too wrong to be hill, slumped across the path. A beast whose limbs had learned the trick of length without the art of grace. Eyes on its chest, mouth where a man's ribs should be, voice thick as wet rope. Hunger, it said, as if the word were a prayer. Rama's arrow answered the prayer with instruction. The creature, Kabandha, howled, rolled, tried to crush them with a reach that had forgotten how to aim. Lakshmana cut as one cuts a knot when time is gone. When the thing fell, the forest exhaled, and in the ruin of it, a human face lifted, startled by its own freedom. Release me fully, the voice said, now clean, and I will point you toward those who can help. South and west, Pampa's waters, a monkey king cast out by a brother who sits on a hill made of sorrow. They burned what needed burning, they listened without interrupting. The freed spirit rose like heat and was gone, leaving air that felt less tired. They went on. The land thinned. The trees gave way to wide, amber grasses and the precise blue of open water. Pampa lay quiet as a thought that hurts and heals at the same time. On its far bank, an old woman gathered berries, sorting them with a care that belonged to love more than to hunger. She saw them and smiled as if she had been waiting since the world was young. Eat, Shabari said, offering fruit. I have saved the sweet ones for the day you arrived. Rama took and ate and did not question how she knew him. Some knowledge does not borrow proof. When he had finished, she blessed him the way a mother blesses a son who must step into fire to pull someone out. Across the hills, she said, pointing, lives Sugrava. He fears the brother who took all and watches the sky for hope that looks like you. Rama stood at the edge of the lake until the wind changed and the water found a new face. He turned to Lakshmana, and in his eyes was the steady burn of a vow sharpened by grief, tempered by duty. Come, he said, let sorrow make us exact, not small. They followed the shore toward the rough shape of Kishkinda, where a friendship waited like a bridge no one had known they were building. Above them, a single heron crossed the sky on slow wings, taking its time, going exactly where it meant to go. Pampa's water held the sky like a promise. Across the reeds, a figure approached, spare and bright-eyed, wrapped in a simple cloak made of bark. He moved with the care of one who has learned to listen before he speaks. "Strangers at Pampa," he said, bowing, "yet not strangers to the work this world requires. I am Hanuman, son of the wind, minister to Sugriva who keeps to the hills of Rishyamaka. Your faces carry purpose. Your steps carry loss. If I am wrong, forgive me. If I am right, come." Rama studied him and felt the air itself lean closer, as if curious. In Hanuman's gaze there was no calculation, only clean intelligence. In his posture, the readiness of a bridge that trusts both banks. "You see well," Rama said. "We seek a friend before we seek a war." Hanuman smiled, relieved by the language he preferred. He led them along a ridge that held the lake on one side and a tumble of rocks on the other, up to a shelter where a wary king watched the horizon the way a man listens for footsteps outside a door he used to own. Sugriva stood to greet them, uncertain whether to hope. His fur was dulled with exile, his eyes were quick as a wire under strain. "I have nothing to give," he said, "except my need and my word." "Need is sometimes the only honest wealth," Rama answered. "What broke you?" "My brother," Sugriva said, and the bitterness in it was old and clean. "Vali took my city, my wife, my name. I breathed because these hills are under the curse of a saint he fears to offend." They spoke until the sun changed color. Stories entered the circle, sat down, and set out their proofs. When the last piece of truth had been offered, Hanuman brought kindling and a shallow bowl. Rama and Sugriva touched flame together, binding their pact with the simplest of witnesses. "My strength for your cause," Sugriva said, "your aim for mine." To test the measure of that aim, Sugriva showed them a white, sun-baked skeleton vast as a ruined boat. "Done to you by," he said. "Vali threw him from the cave mouth to this shore." Rama set his heel and sent an arrow through the heap. Bones leapt and rang, the skull skidding into the lake as if summoned to drink. Then, at Lakshmana's quiet nod, Rama turned to the grove of 7 sal trees. He drew once. The shaft passed through each trunk as if the wood had been made to remember the path. Leaves trembled, then settled. Sugriva's fear loosened like a belt let out a notch. "Call him," Rama said. The roar that answered rolled the hill awake. Vali came with the authority of a storm that thinks it is weather itself. He saw Sugriva and laughed, because laughter is the coin bullies spend to buy fear. The brothers closed. Stone remembered their steps, air moved out of their way. In the first exchange, Sugriva faltered, exile had taken muscle the way rust takes iron. He stumbled back bleeding, shame bitter in his mouth. "Not today," Rama said, catching his arm. "Rest, mark him, return when the breath in you is full." They waited through a day of wind and thin cloud. Tara, Vali's wise queen, came to the threshold of caution and called across it. "Husband," she said, "there is more here than pride to spend. The stranger with Sugriva is not a rumor. He is aim given a body." Vali's laughter hardened. "Advice is a necklace. I will wear it after the fight." When Sugriva returned, he wore a garland so Rama could tell them apart in the rush of limbs and dust. The brothers met like river and fallen tree. The noise had edges. Rama stepped into shadow, his bow lifted to a line that knew no tremor. Vali drove Sugriva back, triumphant already, and in that exact opening Rama loosed. The arrow found the center of Vali's chest with a sound like a seal broken on a long-kept letter. He staggered, stunned that limits applied. He fell to one knee, not in ritual, but because knees are honest. Tara ran to him and held what could still be held. Vali lifted his head and saw the stranger step from shade. "Why from hiding?" he asked, not angry now, only exact. "Why this law?" "And because your strength leaves no equal space within the ring," Rama said. "Justice does not require a referee to be visible. It requires that the weak should not die for spectacle. You took what love did not give and called it right. I end that custom." Vali looked at Tara, at Sugriva, at the far hill where a boy once learned to leap. "I forgot," he said softly, "that kingship is not simply victory." He turned to Sugriva and, to his own surprise, found in his mouth a blessing that did not taste of ash. "Wear the weight," he said, "do not be worn." They burned him with honor. The wind took the last proof of his breath. Sugriva entered Kishkinda to the thunder of doors, remembering how to open. Tara's eyes were dry. Grief, in her, had decided to be discipline. Monsoon came down like a curtain. The world narrowed to rain and the conversations it invents. Work slowed because all work slows in weather like that. Sugriva lost himself in the noisy relief of a crown restored, wine, drums, the soft catastrophes of delay. Lakshmana's patience shortened by inches. His feet found the palace unbidden. Hanuman met him at the steps, and with the care of a diplomat who serves truth before he serves men, steered anger into usefulness. "Let me speak first," he said, and did words like wedges making space where none had been. Sugriva stumbled back to the vow he had made and realized it still fit. When the rain gave the world back, the summons went out. The hills shook off water and sent their people. Bands of Vanaras gathered from caves and cliffs, from banyans that had earned their own legends. Jambavan came with the measured tread of an old bear whose mind still walks faster than his limbs. Angada, Vali's son, stood young and steady, loyalty sharpened to the shape of a spear. Hanuman took the southern command because the map itself asked him to. Parties streamed outward like spokes from a wheel. The southern band crossed scrub and thorn, dunes that held their shape like old promises, and long miles where heat made mirage of everything except duty. Rations thinned. Laughter turned to the kind that keeps morale from drying out completely. At the edge of a cliff, the land simply stopped, and the sea began, blue hammered to hard light by the sun. The wind was full of salt and a news they could not read. They sat in a ragged line beneath a stunted tree, sharing the last of the dates, measuring despair against the work left to do. A shadow fell, broad wings, a glide with memory in it. Sampati landed, feathers graying, eyes dim but burning behind the dimness. "I know that scent," he said, lifting his head to taste the wind. "Ashoka blossoms and iron, I know that cry. My brother flew too close to the sun, I fell to live. You seek a woman stolen by pride that mistook itself for fate." They stood, hope dangerous in them again. Jambavan stepped forward with respect. "Grand Elder, if you know, speak." "Across this water," Sampati said, "a city sits on rock like a crown on a fist. Lanka, in its heart a grove where sorrow is made to seem a virtue. She waits there unbroken." His beak tilted toward Hanuman. "And you will go, you were sketched for this day." Hanuman looked at the sea, then at his hands as if surprised by what they had always known. Doubt, small, practical, rose and was met. Jambavan's voice was old, amused, exact. "Child of the wind, remember what you are. When you were small, you reached for the sun because it pleased you. Now reach because the world asks." Hanuman closed his eyes and opened them altered. Strength returned like tide, quietly at first, then with the plain insistence of water filling every allowed space. He stood taller, the ground stepped back. Angada grinned, unable not to, the Vanaras shouted, all talk of rations forgotten. Hanuman bowed to the line of elders and to the thought of Rama standing at a hut's empty door. "I will go," he said. "I will find her. I will not speak more than needed. I will return." He climbed the hill where wind collects its courage. He faced the south and gathered himself to a single point, a single vow. The earth seemed to hold him and then, politely, to let go. He leapt. The cliff rang. The sea took his shadow and flattened it to a swift stain. Clouds broke themselves to make way. On the far horizon, a darker thread stitched itself to the blue, the line of a fortress on stone. On the beach below, Angada exhaled the breath he had been holding. Jambavan smiled the way old trees smile when the storm moves on, and the roots report that all is well. "Now," he said softly, "let courage do what hunger cannot." Air gathered under Hanuman like a promise remembering its terms. He climbed above the gulls, above the clouds, soft ruin, and the sea below flattened to a sheet of hammered light. When he wanted breath, the wind gave it. When he wanted height, the sky obliged. Far ahead the horizon sharpened, a black stitch on blue, then a wall, then towers shouldering out of rock, the island that called itself a crown. He landed out of sight on a scrubbed headland and made himself small, fur dimmed, shoulders narrowed, footprint light as a bird's. Night took the city, but not completely. Lanka wore lamps like jewels and trusted their glitter. Hanuman slipped along the outer courts, watched gate guards argue about nothing, heard the sleep sounds of a place that believes itself safe. He passed silk halls where laughter had not learned to be ashamed, treasure rooms where gold lay piled like a lazy season, and a court where musicians tuned instruments they would never be allowed to play for truth. He found the grove by the scent long before he saw it, ashoka blossoms and wet earth, a tenderness forced into a stage. In the center, under a tree that had taught itself to stand up for the hopeless, Sita sat on bare ground. She had made a nest of her own quiet. Her hair was unbraided. Her eyes were bright with the kind of strength grief cannot bully. Around her, fear moved in circles and pretended to be advice. Ravana arrived as kings arrive when they wish to be scenes, silk, iron, a hush that is not respect. He spoke to Sita of his wealth as if riches were a language that could translate vows. He promised, he threatened, he bargained with the patience of a man used to getting his way by exhausting everyone else. She listened with the politeness a good house gives even to storm. Then she answered in words that left no place to stand. "My husband is Rama," she said. "Your power is a costume. It will not survive the first rain." He smiled as men smile when they see a hill and imagine it is a rug. "Time will teach you," he said, and set a limit to that time as if limits were his to set. When he left, the grove exhaled shakily. The demonesses brought lies dressed as food. Sita ate only resolve. Hanuman waited until the dark had thickened to its best shade. He climbed the tree above her like a whisper being careful with its consonants and dropped a sprig of bright leaves into her lap. She looked up, more curious than afraid. From the branches came a voice that had borrowed the tone of home. "Daughter of Vidha," it said softly, "do not fear. I am Rama's servant." Her breath shortened and steadied. "If you are," she said, "prove it with something only the day knows." A small gold thing fell to earth, a ring with a name inside it, a river of letters carved by a prince who did not waste lines. Sita took it in both hands, and the grove changed shape. She wept once, like a clay jar cracking from sudden heat, and then did not weep again. "Tell me," she said. Hanuman told her what could be told. The hut at Panchavati, the cry, the vulture who had died like a banner, the path to Pampa, the pact made on simple flame, the army gathering like weather that means to be kind. She listened not for comfort, but for the exactness of each step. When he finished, she placed a small thread from her hair in his palm, a token light and indestructible. "Go back," she said. "Tell him I am one. Tell him the time within me is steady. And tell him this grove has heard what I will not say twice. I need him." Hanuman's hands wanted to lift her and depart. His duty said leave the problem entire, so that justice may be complete. He bowed to the ground where she sat and climbed into the dark. On the way out, Prudence asked one thing of courage: make yourself seen. Not to brag, to measure. He went large. Walls seemed smaller, streets shrank to lines. He roared once, and the city learned the size of its night. Soldiers rushed. He met them with a careful economics, enough force to teach, not enough to forget the lesson. Courtyards broke, towers shook, armories coughed up sparks. He took a standard and snapped it clean, not to insult, but to inform. "This will happen," the gesture said. "And more." Indrajit's nets came spun with mantras meant to bind even air. Hanuman let them catch him, curious about how bonds worked in this city. He was hauled into the court on chains and quiet, would not kneel, would not boast. Ravana looked at him with the particular fury of men who find that rules have stopped obeying them. Commands flew. The old council of mercy arrived late, as it always does in certain houses, and was sent away. "Burn him," Ravana said, and the word moved like a torch. They wrapped Hanuman's tail in cloth and oil and set it alight as if to turn defiance into lantern. He smiled, for the first time without care, and grew. Fire climbed what it could not keep up with. He bounded the walls and wrote a sentence on the city in flame. Streets learned to be rivers, the palace swallowed smoke. The grove's perimeter glowed like a ring just pulled from a forge and thrown to the anvil. only one place he spared, the tree where Sita sat. He stood in the branches once more and let the blaze draw a second, softer circle around her. "Forgive the smoke," he said. "I cannot spare their pride. I can spare your shade." She nodded, one hand covering the ring. "Go," she said. He leapt to the shore and became small again, the fire sliding off him like rain off a leaf. The sea opened its old road. The wind, proud now, carried him high. On the far beach the Vanaras scattered joy like boys' laughter. Jambavan's old face eased, and Katha thumped his chest because the chest was the only drum near. "Did you see?" they asked all at once. "I saw," Hanuman said, and his voice, which had never learned to lie, told the story lean and entire. When he spoke Sita's name, the band fell silent as if standing for a prayer. When he described the grove, even the least devout among them felt gratitude enter like breath. At the word Lanka, the horizon seemed to draw closer, volunteer as a witness. They ran the distance back to Kishkinda as if distance were a mistake. Sugriva listened with the sudden sobriety that power sometimes remembers. Lakshmana's jaw loosened, then set again in a shape the war would recognize. When Rama held the ring, the world reduced to its cleanest axis, loss and vow. "Enough," he said, not to end the story, but to end the pause. "We go." Drums spoke to cliffs, cliffs answered. The hills found their people again, banners, ropes, carts piled with grain and hope. On the march south, fishermen came out with offerings of dried fish and hard bread. Shepherds offered news in place of goats. Children ran ahead to see if the story had faces. At the last spit of land, the sea lifted and set itself down like a giant thinking. The water between them and Lanka was not broad, only absolute. Nala, son of the builder god, stepped forward with the shy certainty of the gifted. "Stones will float," he said, as if he had discovered a small, polite miracle and was embarrassed by it. The army tested and found it true. Rocks that had always chosen sinking chose otherwise when marked with a name spoken correctly. Work took the shape of faith without needing to call itself that. Lines formed. Hands went red and stayed willing. Monkeys sang nonsense that was not nonsense. Bears moved loads the way patience moves hills. The sea accepted each piece and did not complain at the bridge rising over its back. Birds landed on the first span and nodded to one another as if approving the design. Rama stood apart only far enough to see the whole. He wrote strategy in straight strokes, flanks for Sugriva and Angada, center for himself, the old mind of Jambavan where withdrawal would one day be needed and victory should not be wasted. Hanuman listened to every assignment and asked only one more task. "Give me the first sight of the city," he said. "Let me greet it with the courtesy it offered me." Night fell and the bridge still held. Dawn met it with warmth. The far shore answered with drums shaped like defiance. On the wall of Lanka, Ravana watched a road build itself out of refusal and knew for the first time the weight of a simple sentence. Someone is coming who does not care who you think you are. Rama bent, touched the earth, and straightened. Lakshmana laid his hand on his brother's shoulder and did not speak. The army, in a hush made of thousands of breaths, waited. "A forward," Rama said. The bridge received them. The sea bore them. The wind went ahead to say what armies cannot, that the day would be hard and clean, that grief had been measured and turned to use, that the grove where a single woman kept a throne of dirt had already changed the shape of a kingdom. They crossed at dawn, the bridge ringing under thousands of feet like a giant vina tuned to purpose. Lanka rose ahead, black walls, red banners, a geometry meant to frighten. Rama set the camp with a craftsman's calm. Archers on the dunes, Vanora lines staggered to drink the shock, Jambavan where patience was needed and memory would save lives. Hanuman ranged the sky in wide circles, a hawk with a scholar's mind. Before the first drum, Rama sent the oldest courtesy, an offer to end the war without one drop of blood not yet spilt. Vibhishana, Ravana's brother, had already read the cost in the smoke and come over the sea, barefoot, unarmed, carrying counsel like a lamp. "Return, Seta," he said to the wind, as if speaking to his brother through distance, "and keep your city." The answer that returned was iron. "Let there be a second chance," Rama said, and sent Angada to the gate. The envoy stood tall on the ramparts and spoke the simple arithmetic of surrender. One woman, a million spared. Ravana laughed, the kind of laugh that needs an audience to breathe. He ordered Angada seized. The Vanara stamped once and splintered the marble under his heel, then leapt back to camp, carrying only the echo of a door that had been shut too loudly. War arrived at noon. The first clash was sound, conch and drum, roar and shouted names. The second was dust, rising and turning the sun to a dull coin. Then steel and bone met in the old argument that has never learned to end itself. Sugriva broke the right with a joy he refused to be ashamed of. Angada took the left like a river takes a fallen tree, around, through, untroubled. Hanuman moved wherever a line sagged and lifted it as if it weighed nothing. From the ramparts, Indrajit smiled the patient smile of a hunter who knows the habits of his prey. He vanished into mantra and shadow. The air went strange. Serpent arrows hissed from nowhere and found Rama and Lakshmana both, binding limbs with a cold that made breath a chore. They fell, not in panic, but in that awful order the truly dangerous weapons in force. The army wavered, the world tilted. Wind gathered to a point no one could see and then broke in green-gold light. Garuda swept down, vast and laughing, the old enemy of snakes arriving like a festival. The coils withered, dropped, turned to ash in midair. Rama rose, Lakshmana stood, the lines steadied. Indrajit felt, for the first time, what it is to score perfectly and still lose the play. Night brought counsel. In Ravana's court, Vibhishana spoke cleanly and was shouted down. "Return her," he said again, "or the city will pay for your desire with its roofs." Ravana's pride, which had been mistaken for spine for too long, cracked into anger. He banished his brother to the sea and called for a champion that even fear respects. Kumbhakarna woke like a mountain deciding to move. Priests ran, chains clanged, drums found an older rhythm. The giant stood, blinked, listened to the war explained badly, and sighed with the sadness of a good man kept in a bad house. "This is wrong," he said, but I will go, for my king is my fate as much as I am his." He crossed the plain with steps that shook sling stones from boys' hands a mile away. Vanaras scattered and returned, clever as fish, arrows stuck in him like pins in a festival elephant. He swatted companies aside without hate. When he reached the center, Rama stood waiting, bow angled to the exact height. They spoke before they fought. "I regret what I must do," Kumbhakarna said. "So do I," Rama answered, "but regret is not a shield." The fight was short and clean. Rama cut away the giant's certainty, ankle, arm, the great pushing stride. At last, an arrow found the heart that had wanted better days. Kumbhakarna fell forward like a felled tree, and the island felt lighter though no one cheered. The next day punished the morning's boldness. Indrajit took the field in darkness at noon, folded the light around himself, and whispered to a weapon that answers only when pride is quiet, the Shakti. It flew like a final word and struck Lakshmana full. The younger prince dropped as if the earth had asked to hold him early. Sound fled the camp. Even the sea forgot to speak. "Breathe," Rama said, kneeling, and for the first time the command was to himself. The physicians' hands were skilled, their faces were honest. "Night will take him," they said, "unless the mountain gives back what men cannot, Sanjivani, from the slopes of Dronagiri." Hanuman did not wait for assignment. "Name the hill," he said, received the name, and was gone before grief could argue. He crossed the night in a handful of heartbeats, found the peak asleep under starlight, and did not waste time reading labels. He lifted the whole flank, herbs and soil and startled birds, and flew back with dawn tearing at the edges of the sky. He set the mountain down like a mother sets a bowl. The healers found the leaf by scent and memory, crushed it, sang over it, placed it on the wound. Lakshmana's chest rose once, twice, then found its old rhythm. The army learned to cry in joy without making a sound. That evening, the lamps in Rama's tent burned low. He stood with Vibhishana over a map drawn on packed sand, streets, walls, the palace like a black knot. Outside, the men ate in quiet. Inside, vows ripened. "Tomorrow," Rama said, "we stop persuading and start ending." He stepped into the dark and looked toward the grove where a woman had turned bare ground into a throne. He laid one palm on the earth, another on his bow, and spoke so softly that only the wind heard. "Let my arrow carry no hatred. Let it carry only law." Across the wall, Ravana dressed for war in a mirror that had never been used for confession. He tied his armor the way some men tie arguments, too tight, too late. In a still chamber, Sita watched the moon move between leaves and refused to give it her fear. In the camps, thousands lay down and pretended to sleep, each one making a bargain with dawn. When the conch called, it would be the honest sound that ends explanations.